it when we were back there talking about viruses. But yes, fecal oral route is a very, very common way of being infected with both viruses and bacteria, just to let you all know. But what's amazing about these numbers, right? Okay, I go back to talking about how currently, since, you know, the 14th of the month, 14,413 cases of Ebola are out there. 5,177 deaths. The World Health Organization estimates that between 42,000 to 142,000 people will die of cholera this year. That's a lot more than Ebola. But not only that, and this is a thing that just completely blows my mind, right, is if you get it and you get antibiotics for it in time, it can actually be cured. You know, this is not something where, you know, it's like Ebola where you keep saying, oh, okay, well, we will give the person fluids while they're going through this. But other than that, there's these experimental drugs. But, you know, you're still kind of on your own once you're infected. You really have to wait for your immune system to catch up. Cholera, not so much. You can actually get an antibiotic and it will help. But what's interesting is right now, the people that they're estimating will die of cholera, 47.3% will come from Haiti. Because since the earthquake, which has caused really immense structural damages, they still haven't quite recovered. Now, I have to say, though, that these are based on, like, you know, several sources, as you can see at the top that I've pieced together. These numbers right here come from 2010, where they talk about 470,000 total cases of cholera in Haiti that caused that year, 2010 to 2011, 6,631 deaths. So, you know, just food for thought. Any questions that I can answer for you right now? Okay, I'm going to keep going. I hope nobody fell asleep, and I apologize if I'm boring. I just find this stuff really interesting. Typhus. Last week, Explorer talked about the concentration camps in Bergen-Belsen. And I bring this up because typhus is actually a lesser-known disease. And it is not to be, and that's why I listed it, mistaken for typhoid fever. But typhus is actually really, really big, and it killed a lot of people in concentration camps. And the reason why is because it tends to be spread by lice, body lice, when people live in unsanitary conditions, in crowded conditions. You know, body lice was rampant, and along with body lice was typhus. It killed approximately 3 million people between, there is a window that is in my way, 1918 and 1922. It was rampant in World War II, in the Nazi concentration camps, POW camps. You still can get typhus now in places where it's just unclean and unsanitary. So, yeah, a little note there. Typhoid fever is caused by salmonella. Okay, so typhus is caused by, and you can pronounce this, Rickettsia prowazekii, I think. I usually just call it Rickettsia, so please forgive me if you missed that. Typhoid fever, salmonella, is caused by salmonella. It's a form of salmonella. Currently, now, there's about 5,700 cases annually, and it affects about 21.5 million people globally. I bring it up, too, because I don't know if a lot of people know the story of Typhoid Mary. There are actually people that have, they are natural, what's called natural carriers of this Salmonella typhi, and can pass it by preparing food. And you can imagine, by the way, Salmonella typhi, typhoid fever, is a fecal oral transmission. Typhoid Mary was a cook, and she gave it to 50 people. And I'm going to just let you fill in the blanks as to how she might have given this to people as a cook. But her story, and this is before She actually, this is actually before she, antibiotics, which is really unfortunate. She loved to cook. And the problem was that every time she cooked, she'd make people sick. So they sent her to this place called North Brother Island for about 3 years. And they said, we will let you off the island if you promise to never cook for anybody again. And the story goes, and I'm not sure how much of this is true or false, but it is true. She started cooking for people again, and she was sent back for her famous peach cobbler, which apparently she really loved to make for people, and people really loved to eat. But she wasn't allowed to do that because she was a natural carrier. She would always give you typhoid fever, and I guess she also never washed her hands. But in any case, they sent her back to North Brother Island for the rest of her life. So that's why Typhoid Mary is so popular. Tuberculosis. Tuberculosis is one of those quiet epidemics that you never know about, like you never hear about, but it's one of those that just blows your mind when you actually look at the numbers. 9,582 cases in the United States every year, about. In 2013, 9 million were infected, and it caused 1.5 million deaths. Again, tuberculosis is curable. You can take an antibiotic for it. The problem is that you have to take the antibiotic for a long time, and you're not supposed to drink alcohol while you're taking it. And so a lot of people, as soon as they start feeling better, stop taking the antibiotic. And that's very problematic. And I was going to explain this in this slide here. Any questions that I can answer for you so far about that? Thank you, Gina. You said my voice matches my bird. Thanks. No questions? All right. I'm going to talk about like this very big no-no that none of us should do, which is stop taking your antibiotics before you're supposed to. And the reason why is because you can get this antibiotic resistance. I would argue that the world would be a much better place if people would just take all their antibiotics when they're supposed to. And here's the reason why. So first of all, some common bacterial diseases that you probably know. Strep throat, bacterial pneumonia, salmonella we just talked about, UTIs, and I forgot to write it out because I'm just so used to calling them UTIs. Urinary tract infections, right, are UTIs. Most UTIs are actually caused by bacteria. Impetigo is like a skin disease. Helicobacter pylori is what tends to cause ulcers. And then you've got your, normal everyday anthrax, right? Which is a very, it's almost like your bioweapon of choice there. Now, strep throat, bacterial pneumonia, ear infections, things like that, doctors tend to prescribe antibiotics, and they tell you, you should take it for 7 days. Some are 10 days. Some are a lot longer than that. People take it, they feel better, and they go, well, then why should I keep taking this medicine? I'm going to stop because I feel better, and obviously I'm cured. The problem, and you can see this on the diagram on the right, is that when you take antibiotics, you're basically creating a Darwinian environment. This is actually the ideal model for evolution and ecology. And I'm biased because I was actually an evolution and ecology major before I studied microbiology. So imagine these are, say, salmonella, okay, in your gut. You take antibiotics, it knocks it down to about 2. And it's good, you feel good because your body is going to take care of the rest. But the problem is when you stop taking your antibiotics, these are what's left. It's the guys that actually have antibiotic resistance to the antibiotics you're taking. So what you end up doing is if you don't take all of your antibiotics, you don't kill everything. And so there can be a rebound, and what ends up happening is that your bacteria multiply a lot. And the problem now is that they're now resistant because they have a virulence factor, an antibiotic resistance gene, to the antibiotic you took. So please take your antibiotics because it's important. The other thing too, and I'm going to add this because of the microbiology background in me, is when you're taking your antibiotics, keep in mind that you're killing the really good gut bacteria in your body too. And that can be bad because what ends up happening is when you kill the good bacteria, it leaves room for bad bacteria to grow. It's what's called an opportunistic pathogen. So when you are taking antibiotics, it's really important to take what's called a probiotic at the same time. And you can take them, you can actually buy them at the drugstore. They're called probiotics. They're like in the vitamin section. Or you can take yogurt too, which will also do the same thing. And you actually want to take it regularly because what you're ending up doing is, you take your antibiotic, it kills everything. You take your yogurt, it helps. And then you take your antibiotic again and it kills everything. So it's important to, especially when you're taking antibiotics, to take something else with it. Because you can end up getting something what's called C. difficile. And C. difficile is not something you want to have. It is a natural gut bacteria. But the problem when you take antibiotics is it can actually become antibiotic resistant. Now, I really simplified this story, okay? Very much so. But, and maybe I shouldn't have. Here's the problem with this selection with the antibiotics. You take your penicillin and it knocks down the bacterium and then you stop. Well, you still have certain bacteria that are still around that are resistant to this penicillin. There is this scary thing called conjugation. And I didn't write this down because I didn't think I should put it in, but now that I think about it, it might actually be an interesting thing. I can't spell it, J-U-G-A-T-I-O-N, conjugation. And certain bacteria can actually pass their genes to other bacteria. I'm not going to get really into it, but it's almost like primordial sex, except there's no recombination. It's kind of like saying, hey, you have an antibiotic resistance gene to penicillin. Can I have a copy of that? And so your C. difficile in some ways actually can be antibiotic resistant because they pick up antibiotic resistance genes from other bacterium and multiply. And then they cause really awful, nasty things like irritable bowel syndrome, diarrhea, very bad muscle cramping, and death. Death is terrible. But they're also very, very resistant to other antibiotics. Again, this is the reason why Blue keeps saying, take your full spectrum of antibiotics. When antibiotics don't kill the C. difficile because it's opportunistic, right? There's nothing there, so it's growing. The only other treatment that I'm aware of is, and I don't even know what it's called, they end up taking poop pills. You actually have to take fecal matter. Usually they spin it down from somebody else, put it in a frozen pill, freeze it, and make you take it. You have to take poop to reseed your gut. That usually works, actually. It's starting to be a more common procedure, but there is a lot of controversy behind that too. Fecal implants, thank you. Fecal implants, thank you, Stephen, can be taken in the other end. So, yes. Yes. I won't read that out loud, Truth, but you are exactly right. But if it comes to life and death, I would do it. I won't get you wrong. That's it, yes. Oh gosh, the puns. All right, so prevention and treatment. So I'm going to take a quick pause here before I go into protozoans to talk about prevention and treatment. Food preparation. I know a lot of people hear about this, but I'm going to just reiterate it. Cooking meats at their correct temperature. Do you see up here I have reference number 24, which I strongly suggest everybody should look up and just bookmark it because it's very helpful. Unless you're like me who after studying pathogenic bacteriology, keeps bleach bottles and separate cutting boards and food thermometers everywhere because I'm paranoid about this stuff. Stay away from raw hamburger, please. EHEC that I talked about before, that E. coli, it only takes 10 to make you sick. And it's the symptoms of that are really nasty. Bloody diarrhea is one of them. And then like we said before, you can get organ failure just because you want to have a bloody hamburger. I'm not sure if that's worth it. So you should be cooking your hamburger to a minimum temperature of 160 degrees Fahrenheit. Blue, how do I know that it's 160 degrees Fahrenheit? The juice runs clear is one way. However, if you're like me, who's a little obsessive compulsive, I have a food thermometer. I push it in the middle of the meat, and when it reads 160, I know it's safe. Poultry is 165, so it's a little bit higher. Okay, so that's like general rule of thumb. You can read more on that website, so please do. Proper hand washing technique. I talked about this with Ebola too, because again, it's just one of my things. 30 seconds with soap and warm water. If you go to a restaurant, and this happened to me, so I'm going to tell you a little story. I went to a food court, and we were in the bathroom. And there was somebody that worked for one of the fast food. I think it was like, I can't even remember now, so I won't even try. It was for one of the restaurants. She used the restroom, and she walked out without washing her hands. We left. I don't care how hungry I was. That's just disgusting. So, and I watch people who don't wash their hands. It's awful. So, yeah, wash your hands. Now, a little tip, because everybody knows about hand washing, but a lot of people don't know about this. And for women, this is super, super important. And for men who have women as partners, I think it's just something that you should tell them. Urinary tract infections are really actually preventable by this tip, and you should pass it along. And this tip is this. Before and after intercourse, you should pee. And that actually will prevent urinary tract infections. So please pass that along. It's actually a really, really good fact, and not a lot of people know about it. I don't know why it's not told more often. Maybe it's uncomfortable or something, So, tell people, and, just tell them, before you go and after intercourse, you should pee. It will help. Next thing, vaccinations. We talk about this. I'm going to talk a little bit about vaccines in a minute too. We'll have a nice discussion about that, hopefully. Vaccines, please vaccinate. And, again, there's a bunch of, anyways, I'll talk about that later. Antibiotics, and I'm going into, okay, so prevention we talked about in the top part. Antibiotics on the bottom part. They only work with bacteria. Why? Because bacteria are alive and viruses are not. Bottom line. Don't ask for an antibiotic if you have a viral disease, because again, we just talked about antibiotic resistance. The problem is, if you have something that's antibiotic resistance, you're kind of screwed. If there's nothing else for it, then you really have to rely on your immune system to take it down. And the immune system is not, it does take down bacteria, but it's a lot messier. You get the fevers, you get these nasty, nasty things because of that cell wall that creates these just really big immune reactions to it. Viruses, there are a few antiviral drugs, but I have to tell you, they're not that good. Really, the two biggest defenses that humankind has to viruses is vaccination, and this Tamiflu and Relenza, which is actually not that good. Usually what you take is to cover the symptoms. There are things being developed, but they're still not perfected. So I don't know if you've heard of Tamiflu and Relenza. There's mixed reviews on the data behind these two medications, but the idea is this. If you have the flu, these are actually both vaccines for flus. Not vaccines, I am sorry. These are both medications you take, antiviral medications that you take after the flu within 24 hours of symptoms, and it's supposed to knock down your flu symptoms. There's data that says it actually doesn't work, and then there's data that says it does. So I can't really tell you either way, but just to tell you that there's stuff that says there is, and there's stuff that says there isn't. There's also as you know, many antiviral drugs for the AIDS vaccine too, for people that have HIV, which seems to delay the actual full-blown AIDS. So people do take those, but it's not a pleasant spectrum at all. We, by far, do not have as many defenses against viruses as we do with bacteria. Thank goodness for antibiotics. Otherwise, they would just, life would not be as pleasant. Any questions that I can answer, anything people want to add, please do. Because to me, that just leads to a lot of discussion. Go for it, Vadi, for your question. Oh, and I forgot to, obviously, I forgot to put this on here. I can't believe I did. Protected sex. Right, there's so many different UTIs, not UTIs, sexually transmitted diseases out there, STDs, too many abbreviations for me today. Many STDs out there that can be preventable if you just use protection, including pregnancy for some people that consider that an STD, which I don't, but I'm just saying. It prevents a lot of things, and bacterial infections are one of them. Okay, so Vadi asked, a vaccination makes the body create antibodies, right? Yes, actually, I'm really simplifying here. Yes, they create antibodies, but also what they do is what's called priming the cells, your immune system cells. When your body is exposed to a virus, it creates what's called a memory, so that if it encounters that virus again, the reaction to it is incredible. It's incredible. It gets knocked down before you can blink. If it's never seen the virus before, then it takes a lot longer, several days before your immune system kicks in. In fact, usually the symptoms of whatever sickness it is actually your body defending. Do I need to relog? Okay, so where was I? Were there other questions I could answer, or did you guys answer them already? Okay, so Vadi asked,
someone else asked something first, actually.
I'm sorry. Oh, Clint, let's see. Are you going to talk about the behavior changes brought on by bacterial pathogens, or is that another talk? You know what? I was going to talk a little bit about toxoplasmosis. But that's probably the extent of it for this one. So yeah. But yes, there are. And in fact, there's a lot of even cultural changes too, in response to some of these things. But no, I was not going to talk about it in this one. But that's a good question. Let's see. Okay, so Vadi does a vaccination have a very similar structure to the thing it prepares the body for in order to create memory? Or yes, it does. It most definitely does. Usually a vaccine is either attenuated virus, which means you take a virus and you weaken it to the point where it can't hurt you anymore, or it's bits of the protein coat so that your body can recognize it. Let's see, Victoria, let's see, you say here, does nutrition have any place in this? A little bit. When we talk about immunocompromised people that, for instance, don't have enough nutrition or they're pregnant, elderly people, or certain conditions, like if somebody has HIV, their immune system is just not reactive enough, they are more susceptible to some of these viruses and viruses and bacteria than others. So yes. Other questions I can answer before I go on? Okay, I'm going to talk very briefly about secondary infections. And, these I find interesting. It's so funny. I start with the lecture with certain things, and then I just keep adding to them. So, because I think, well, maybe they'll like this too. So secondary infections. And part of it is because, it's almost like I know, but I don't think it's common knowledge. Flu to pneumonia is a very common one. A lot of times people don't die from flu. They actually die from the pneumonia that comes in because of the flu. The flu is a virus. The pneumonia is bacterial. And it's sometimes opportunistic. You may actually have strep pneumoniae, which is one of the causal organisms for pneumonia, already living in your nose. But when flu comes, certain conditions, like all the gross mucus and inflammation and stuff like that, it just makes a perfect environment for a secondary infection. Sinus infections, ear infections, some of these tend to be secondary infections. So this is my advice. If you're not better within 4 to 5 days of being sick, or all of a sudden you're feeling better and all of a sudden you're sick again, I suggest you should go to the doctor and get it checked out to see if you have a secondary infection. Another tip for that is when you're sick, you should change your sheets and pillows often. Now think about this, right? When you have a viral infection, you are oozing tons and tons and tons of virus that your body still has to fight. It's about numbers, right? Your sheets, your pillows, all of those things are just like, viral cesspools, bacterial cesspools, right? And so if you change them, it lowers the numbers of virus and things like that that you're exposed to. Cold and flu medications only mask the symptoms, so you're not feeling them, but they're not a cure. I have heard mixed ideas about this. There are doctors that are against taking a lot of cold and flu if you don't need to, because when you suppress the symptoms, you're actually suppressing some of what your body is trying to naturally keep as an immune reaction. So, to keep that in mind. Thank you, Natalia, so much for the local chat there. I appreciate it. Get plenty of rest and obviously stay home so you don't infect others. I'm a big proponent of that. When I used to have students that were sick, I'd actually call the parents and say, you send them home now and don't come back. So, because, you don't want them to infect other people, but not only that, if you're tired, your immune system can't kick in and take care of it. And if anybody wants me to do a talk on the immune system, I really like talking about the immune system, so let me know. Anyways, let's talk about protozoans. Protozoans, unlike bacteria. So let me just a quick summary. We talked about prions, which are just protein. Then we talked about viruses, which is like nucleic acid in a protein coat, right? And then we talked about bacteria, which is a type of cell, a prokaryotic cell, but very tiny and very different. Protozoans are a whole new animal, so to speak. They're almost animal. They're single-celled organisms, not like bacteria because they are eukaryotic cells. So their cells are, I would even argue, more complex than than our eukaryotic cells are in some cases. Some common protozoans that you might have heard about, and if you haven't, you will, because I'm going to talk about some of them. Malaria, Giardia. This is a picture of a Giardia, by the way. Being, into microbiology, I really like microorganisms. And Giardia just looks really adorable, doesn't it? It looks like a smiley face. Trypanosoma, Entamoeba, Cryptosporidium, Trichomoniasis. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about the treatments and the medications, but there are treatments and medications for these. The side effects are not as pleasant, and they take a lot longer. And the reason why they do is because eukaryotic cells, protozoans, are very similar to ours. So the more similar these cells are to our cells, the harder the cure in some ways, because those chemicals can actually also affect us. So just, some food for thought there. They are not as easily curable as antibiotics. Antibiotics can take a whole ton of antibiotics. There's certain side effects, but for the most part, they don't really hurt our cells, really. The stuff that we have to take to kill off protozoans, not so pleasant. So, Thickbrick showed me this picture. I love this picture. Do you see it? It's made out of mosquitoes in the shape of Hitler, because the argument there is malaria is more deadly than some of our famous I can't even think of the word right now. I'm sorry, people. But malaria is a really, really, yes, thank you, mass murder. Malaria is a very bad killer globally, and I'll tell you about it. So you can see some of the sources. It's caused by Plasmodium falciparum and Plasmodium vivax. Falciparum is the more deadlier form. this is the mind-blowing statistic to me. It affects nearly 200 million people a year, okay? A year. And it kills approximately 627,000